1938, British playwright Patrick Hamilton premiered the stage play Gaslight. It told the story of a manipulative husband who makes his wife doubt her own memory and perception. The tale hit the big screen in 1940, but it was the 1944 version, directed by George Cukor, starring the unforgettable Ingrid Bergman and the charismatic Charles Boyer, that made it a worldwide sensation. The plot follows a controlling husband, Gregory Anton, played by Charles Boyer, who tries to convince his wife, Paula, played by Ingrid Bergman, that she's losing her mind. His method is a series of everyday manipulations. He hides objects and then tells her she misplaced them, denies conversations that actually happened, and, most famously, dims the home's gas lights and later insists they never changed. His aim is to make her question her own memory, perception, and judgment until she feels mentally unstable, so he can control her life and cover up a terrible crime. Later, the term gaslighting entered the language of psychology to describe a form of emotional abuse in which one person systematically manipulates another into doubting their grasp of reality. Over time, therapists identified it as a common pattern in toxic relationships, marked by distorting facts, denying evidence, and undermining the victim's credibility. Today, the concept applies not only to romantic dynamics, but also to family, workplace, political, and religious settings. Any context where someone seeks power by planting doubt about what's real and what isn't. In this video, we'll examine whether the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses uses gaslighting tactics to keep followers loyal to the organization. Stick around to the end. We'll look at clear examples through the lens of critical thinking and good old common sense. Before we get started, I want to make something clear. I deeply value my privacy. That's why the narrator's voice and image you're seeing were created with artificial intelligence. However, all the research, writing, and editing of this video were done by me, the creator. You can call me Nowachi. Dr. Robin Stern defines gaslighting as a power dynamic in which one person, the gaslighter, imposes their version of reality while the other, the gaslightee, gives ground and lets that vision replace their own. The result is that the victim starts doubting their perception, judgment, and even memory, gradually losing trust in themselves. We'll start by looking at how a Jehovah's Witness gradually yields ground until the governing body's view supplants their own. Then we'll walk through real-life examples of how this plays out. As often happens among Jehovah's Witnesses, it all begins with a Bible text to which distinctive interpretations are later added. In this case, it's Isaiah 55 verses 8 to 9, which says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and your ways are not my ways, declares Jehovah. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." The message seems straightforward. Because God is all-knowing, humans can never fully grasp his ways or the reasons behind what he does. If that's true, what are we supposed to do? This is where that passage from Isaiah gets linked to Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 7. Trust in Jehovah with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways take notice of him, and he will make your paths straight. Do not become wise in your own eyes. Fear Jehovah, and turn away from bad. In other words, if you don't understand why God does something, or why something is commanded in his word, don't overthink it or slip into the arrogance of believing you know better than he does. Just trust and let yourself be led. Up to this point, everything fits within a typical Judeo-Christian framework and isn't unique to Jehovah's Witnesses. The turn comes with their particular reading of Matthew 24 verses 45 to 47. Who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics, to give them their food at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on coming finds him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings. An average Christian might take this as, if I keep busy spreading the gospel and doing God's work, he'll reward me with a place in heaven, or something along those lines. But the leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses have interpreted it in different ways throughout their history, always assigning the identity of the faithful and discreet slave to a specific entity. At one time, they said it was the Watchtower. Later, Charles Taze Russell. When I was a witness, the teaching was that it referred to all anointed Christians with a heavenly hope, arguably closer to the traditional view. Today, However, they claim it's the governing body. Here's where the real twist of the screw happens. When a witness accepts this explanation, the conclusion is Jehovah has appointed the faithful and discreet slave, that is, the governing body, over all his belongings. Therefore, the governing body has authority directly from God. From there, everything follows easily. If God appointed them, who am I to question them? And if there's something I don't understand, Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 7 provides the answer. Trust in Jehovah and do not rely on your own understanding. In other words, don't overanalyze. Accept the governing body's explanation. Through this chain of reasoning, a power relationship is established between the believer and the governing body, the necessary groundwork for gaslighting to take root. Next, we'll look at concrete examples of how the leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses use this mechanism with their followers. A recent example of gaslighting by the governing body shows up in the October 2025 Watchtower. In the article 1925, 100 years ago, they wrote, in 1925, many Bible students expected the restoration of the earthly paradise. Why? Brother Albert Schroeder, who later served on the governing body, explained, it was thought that then the remnant of Christ's anointed followers would go to heaven to be part of the kingdom, and that the faithful men of old, such as Abraham, David, and others, would be resurrected as princes to take over the government of the earth as part of God's kingdom. As the year progressed, and their hopes did not materialize, some understandably became disappointed. Proverbs 13 verse 12. Spontaneous. That's the Watchtower's line. A bunch of rank-and-file Bible students supposedly came up with it on their own, believing 1925 would bring a paradise earth and the resurrection of the ancient worthies. When it didn't happen, they were disappointed. Right, totally spontaneous. The rank-and-file brothers? Always off the mark. What the article never mentions is that it wasn't just some brothers. It was the president of the Watchtower Society himself, Joseph Franklin Rutherford, good old Joe Rutherford, who wrote, in millions now living will never die. The chief thing to be restored is the human race to life. And since other scriptures definitely fix the fact that there will be a resurrection of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and other faithful ones of old, and that these will have the first favor, we may expect 1925 to witness the return of these faithful men of Israel from the condition of death, being resurrected and fully restored to perfect humanity and made the visible, legal representatives of the new order of things on earth. And as if that wasn't enough, he doubled down on page 97. Based upon the argument heretofore set forth, then, that the old order of things, the old world, is ending and is therefore passing away, and that the new order is coming in, and that 1925 shall mark the resurrection of the faithful worthies of old and the beginning of Reconstruction, it is reasonable to conclude that millions of people now on the earth will be still on the earth in 1925. Then, based upon the promises set forth in the divine word, we must reach the positive and indisputable conclusion that millions of people now living will never die. Another thing the October Watchtower conveniently leaves out is that many sold their homes and businesses, dropped out of school, and postponed marriage and children, all just to go preaching. And if we follow the line of reasoning in that magazine, apparently the only ones to blame for all this were the witnesses themselves, who just spontaneously decided that the end would come in 1925. Clear enough for gaslighting. Oh, you want it clearer? No problem. As I show in this video, the Watchtower squarely blamed its flock for their failed expectations of 1975. But it doesn't stop there. As you can also see in this video, in various court cases they cynically argued that shunning those who are removed from the congregation has always been voluntary. The first time I heard that, and especially watching the confidence and even indignation with which they said it, believe me, I felt just like Ingrid Bergman's character. Was my memory failing me? Was I just confused after so many years outside the organization? Luckily, all the Watchtowers and books are there to confirm it isn't my memory that's failing. As we've seen, someone who falls victim to gaslighting ends up losing complete confidence in their own judgment. That's why, perhaps the most important lesson here is to actually trust your own understanding. I know the Bible says not to rely on your own understanding, but if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you're really just relying on the governing body's understanding. In other words, you're still trusting the understanding of men. Trust yourself when something inside you tells you that a loving God would never want you to let your child die by refusing a blood transfusion. In cases of abuse, trust yourself when you realize that your well-being and your family's is 1,000 times more important than the reputation of the congregation. Trust yourself when the governing body says the best career is full-time service, and you find yourself thinking, why should full-time service be the best career for everyone? Isn't God supposed to have given each of us different talents and interests? Why should I feel guilty for choosing what I truly believe is best for my own life? Trust yourself when you feel your child is suffering unnecessary shame and stress from refusing birthday celebrations at school. Remember, birthdays today don't carry the same meaning they did centuries ago, just like toasts don't. If the governing body now allows toasts because their original meaning has faded, then why shouldn't the same apply to birthdays? So go ahead, lift that burden off your child's shoulders. Turn their sadness into a smile. Does any other situation come to mind where you should rely on your own judgment, or another example of gaslighting among Jehovah's Witnesses? Share in the comments. Let me ask you something. Do you want this content to reach more and more people who need it? It's really simple, and it doesn't cost you a thing. Just hit subscribe, turn on a notification bell, leave a like, and share this video with anyone you think it could help. Thank you for being part of this project. See you soon.